Hi there. Emotional wounds, insensitive statements adults you respected made when you were younger, and rejection are all emotional baggage that we carry with us as adults. We can also add traumatic experiences and hardships to this baggage. Unfortunately, many women believe that we must hold on to this clutter although it does not serve or benefit us in any way. In today's Stress Talk with Marcyline, we are talking about clearing emotional clutter to lower stress and live healthy lives. And we're going to get into that in just one moment. Hi there, and welcome to Stress Talk Live with Marceline. This is where we help women to live healthy lives through strategic stress management and solution focused self care. Before I get into what we're talking about today, I'd like to invite you to like, follow, and subscribe to ML Bailey Consultants on Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram. This is where you can see all of my little social media stuff, as well as some strategic stress management tips and solution focused self care that you can incorporate into your daily lives. And towards the end of our time together here today, I'm also going to share a resource with you that I believe will provide you with some free consultation as well as some helpful hints so that you can start on your road to a lower stressed life. Okay, so what are we talking about today? Well, let me pull up some notes so I can get into it a little bit. We're talking about, well, let me start it this way. We're about to move into spring. Some areas in our country are experiencing record heat, and it's warm. The trees are pollinating. The robins are starting to make their way north, and it's the days are starting to get longer. Right? We have more sunshine during the day. I know in California, they're getting hit with a major storm in a parts of California that's unbelievable. But apart from that, we are moving into our spring season. And when we think about spring, we think about things like spring cleaning, clearing all the junk, cleaning the garage, cleaning the closets, getting rid of sheets that no longer fit the bed, getting rid of stuff that you've held on to for years. And so we're talking about spring cleaning. Well, in our episode today, and for most of the month, we're going to talk about clearing emotional clutter. And I shared with you in the intro a little bit about what emotional clutter is. It's that emotional baggage that we carry, the emotional wounds, the insensitive statements that people have said to us over the course of a lifetime, those hurts, feelings of rejection that we might have experienced. And while we carry it, like clutter, it usually just sits around and it doesn't do us any good. It doesn't benefit us. It doesn't help us. So, for the month of March, we're going to talk about how to get rid of that emotional clutter. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about clutter itself. First, we want to define what clutter is. What is it to you? It may be different for you than it is for me. Second, we're going to talk about emotional clutter and what that actually looks like. And then third, we're going to talk about where we store that clutter. Where? In our bodies, minds, hearts. Where do we store that emotional clutter? So, those are the three things that we're going to talk about today as we talk about clearing clutter. Okay, so let's get started. Let's talk about it. So, what is clutter to you? If you're listening live, or even if you're watching the replay, I'd like to invite you to just drop into the comment center, set the comment section or the chat section. What is clutter to you? What does that mean? And I'm not talking about emotional clutter. I'm talking about clutter in general. Now, when I think about clutter, I sometimes think about older people who've collected things over the course of their lifetime, people who've been in homes for an extended period of time. We've lived in our home for about 18 years. And yes, we have clutter. I'm going to admit it. We have clutter. And I am probably I'm probably the biggest culprit of it because I don't like to throw things away. I hold on to them because lots of times they have sentimental value to me. So I like to hold on to it. My husband is a lot better. He can throw my stuff away. He has no problems getting rid of certain stuff. So, but I like to hold on to it because I can tell a story about it. Well, for a lot of people, they hold on to things like that because it has a sentiment. There's a story attached to it. They can tell you when they got it, why they got the item, where the item was purchased. They can tell you everything about the item. And they hold on to it because of that sentimental value. But clutter has a lot of different dimensions, doesn't it? If you get a newspaper daily, you may be someone who stacks newspapers up all the time, and you have a stack of newspaper just waiting to go to recycle or waiting to go in the trash. Older people, as I said, sometimes have things that they've collected over the years and they hold on to them because they have sentimental value. Clutter can also be in the form of books. As you see on my bookshelf, I have lots of books. Well, sometimes I've had so many books that they weren't on the shelf like they are now, but I've stacked them any way I can get them in, and it didn't look neat or orderly. So that is a form of clutter. Clothes that are scattered, that are thrown across a sofa, or that's on the floor, that too can be viewed as clutter. Sometimes we have so much clutter, we don't even see it anymore. It doesn't look junky to us. It doesn't look out of place because it's been there for so long. So I want you to just think about what is clutter for you. I've talked about clutter being things that a lot of older people, some older people, I'm raising my hand, collect because it has sentimental value. Um, Sometimes people have difficulty throwing things away. Okay, I have to raise my hand on that one too. But clutter can be in different forms: clothing, books, newspaper, bags. Do you collect a lot of plastic bags from the grocery? That can be clutter, especially if it's not neat. Just drop it in the chat. What is clutter to you? How do you define clutter? I want you to get a sense of what that means to you. What does clutter mean to you? For some, clutter may not be a bad thing. For others, it may drive you nuts. I have a friend who can't stand clutter and she gets rid of things. She just doesn't have things hanging around her home. Um, Maybe one day I'll be like that. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know if I'll ever reach that point. So think about, what is clutter to you? We're talking about clearing emotional clutter so you can live a healthy life. The second thing I'd like for you to think about as we're continuing our discussion is, what about emotional clutter? Um, what does emotional clutter mean to you? When you think of emotional clutter, what does that invoke? Drop that in the chat. And again, if you're watching live, or even if you're watching on the replay or listening to the podcast, by the way, you can drop that in, emotional clutter. And I'm going to share a few things about emotional clutter. First, emotional clutter can be in the form of thoughts. And as you've heard me say before, just because you think something doesn't mean that it is true. So, emotional clutter, when they are thoughts that are not necessarily based in fact. They are thoughts that are in our head, yes, thoughts that are in our head that's filling our head with um, images and um, thoughts that are not necessarily true, but they're there and we're thinking about them all the time. It could be in the form of distorted thinking. We talked about distorted thinking a week or two ago. Could be in the form of distorted thinking. It could be in the form of stinking thinking. Remember, I threw that phrase out, stinking thinking. It could be thoughts that are from ingrained or core beliefs. But the key to having emotional clutter is that a lot of times it is not based in truth. It is based on an emotion or a feeling from some of those things that I mentioned earlier. The insensitive remark, the feeling of rejection, those things. So, when I'm talking about emotional clutter, I want you to become aware of what that is for you. And I've given you some examples: thoughts that are not facts, thoughts that are based in feelings that extend from a core belief or beliefs that are ingrained. The other thing about emotional clutter is that our emotional clutter is often viewed as, I mean, we can see it. It grabs our attention. When we have stinking thinking, when we're feeling some kind of way, my sisters know what that phrase means. I'm feeling some kind of way. When you're feeling some kind of way, when you have a negative sense of yourself or a negative feeling, it grabs your attention and it's almost like it pulls you in. It sucks you in, right? When we're happy, when we're joyful, when we're feeling great, those feelings don't always suck us in and hold us. It's the negative feelings that suck us in, almost like a vacuum, and it holds us hostage. So we want to be aware of the emotional clutter that we carry because it grabs our attention. What this means is it's just a pile of stuff that we don't need, thoughts, feelings, beliefs that do not serve us. Sometimes we think our emotional clutter is harmless, right? Like the sock that's on top of the kitchen counter or the pile of newspapers that are in the corner. We think that it's harmless. It's not hurting anybody. It's just there. The thing that we want to keep in mind is with emotional clutter, it does cause harm. It can cause harm. It can increase our stress level. It can deplete our energy. It can hold us hostage, and it can prevent us from moving forward in the direction that we desire to go. So we're talking about emotional clutter right now. Thoughts that are not facts, stinking thinking, right? Based on ingrained beliefs that are not born out of facts or truth. Emotional clutter can grab our attention, and it's like piles of stuff that we may view as harmless, right? But sometimes we view it as necessary because when we have emotional clutter, it often feeds into feelings of anxiety because we use it as what if? What if this happens to me again? What if this person says something negative to me again? What if I am rejected again? We use that emotional clutter to feed into our anxieties and our feelings. And again, that increases our stress levels, it depletes our energy, and it does not serve us. We are talking about clearing the emotional clutter so that we can live a healthy life. We've talked about a couple of things. I asked you to define clutter for yourself, just clutter in general. And I gave you some examples of things that I think about when I think about clutter. We also talked about emotional clutter. And I asked you as well to think about emotional clutter. What is that to you? And I gave you a few examples about emotional clutter. Now, we're going to talk about where we store clutter. Where is it stored? Where do you store your emotional clutter? Where does it show up? How do you know it's there? Do you recognize if it's there? So, one of the things that I said earlier is that with clutter in general, clutter that's in our home, sometimes we no longer see it because we're so accustomed to it being in a certain place. It's not really clutter. It's just the sock that's on the counter. It's the newspaper that's in the corner, that's piled in the corner, waiting to go to the recycle. It's the mail that's on top of the kitchen table. We don't even see it. We don't notice it because it's been there for quite a while. So, where does your emotional clutter show up? I'm going to share with you three areas that we find emotional clutter. Okay. The first is our brain. And I spoke about that a few minutes earlier. Our brain has thoughts, and it can be stinking thinking, it could be distorted thoughts, but it's there. The things that we think that are not based in truth, that is evidence of emotional clutter. And it's in our head. Bing, right here, in our head, in our brain. Oftentimes, When we have stinking thinking or distorted thoughts, it's because of experiences that we've had and that have caused us to believe a certain thing about ourselves and about our interactions with the world around us. And because of those interactions and because of those core beliefs, it causes a certain thought pattern. And that thought pattern is what we call distorted thinking or stinking thinking. That is a sign of emotional clutter. And it's one that I want you to be very aware of because when you have emotional clutter, again, it causes your stress levels to go up and stay up, and it depletes your energy. What we want to do is be aware of how we're thinking and where that emotional clutter is being stored in our brain so that we can clear it. And once we clear it, we can replace it with thoughts that are useful and beneficial to us, thoughts that are based in truth. The other place that emotional clutter shows up is in our heart. In our heart. Boom, ba boom, ba boom, ba boom, ba boom, ba boom, ba boom. In our heart. Let's see. Let's see. Can I do a heart? I don't know. I don't know. That doesn't really look like a heart. Okay. Anyway, in our hearts. And how does that show up? It shows up when we lack sensitivity to others, when we do not express compassion, demonstrate compassion, when we lack connection with other people. Also, it shows up when we have emotional pain, when it hurts, when we hurt emotionally. That is how emotional clutter shows up in our hearts. Lack of sensitivity, lack of connection with others, and emotional pain. Also, when we cannot extend compassion and empathy to others, that's because there is clutter in our hearts. Boom, 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 boom. So, two places that emotional clutter resides, where we store it, in our brain, boom, boom, and in our hearts, boom, boom. The third place is in our bodies. In our bodies. Emotional clutter is stored in our bodies, and this is how it shows up. It shows up in stress. When our hearts are pounding so hard and beating so fast, when we're constantly tense, when we um, when we lie down, our bodies are um, like so tight. Our muscles are so tight that it's hard to move. When we ache, when we get up after a complete night's rest, shows up in stress. When we have headaches, that's how emotional clutter shows up in our body. It also shows up as chronic illness, diabetes, high blood pressure, heart disease, arthritis. Yes, arthritis. Cancer. If you have cancer, emotional clutter can um, contribute to the stress that you experience, which prevents or slows down your healing. Okay. So emotional clutter shows up in our bodies, and we must be aware of that. We need to be aware of how it shows up. So we've been talking about clearing emotional clutter so that we can live a healthy life. I've talked about three things, and I'm just going to go over them quickly. I've talked about how your thoughts, I talked about your thoughts and what you think about clutter in general. What is it to you? What is clutter to you? When you think about clutter, what do you think about? I think about myself. I do. The second thing we talked about is defining emotional clutter. And I asked you again to define emotional clutter for yourself. I also gave you examples of emotional clutter and what it can mean for us. The third item that I talked about was where emotional clutter shows up. And there are three places that emotional clutter shows up. It shows up in the brain, in our brain. It shows up in our hearts, and it shows up in our bodies. And I gave examples of how that looks. So join me this week. No, I'm sorry. Join me this month. I was a little distracted there. Join me this month because we're going to talk about emotional clutter and clearing emotional clutter so that you can lower those stress levels, boost your energy, and live a healthy life. I want to remind you to like, follow, and subscribe to ML Bailey Consultants on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. You can find the replays of this live broadcast on Facebook and YouTube, and you can also listen to it on the podcast, and it's entitled Stress Talk. Finally, I'm going to invite you to take the quiz. The quiz is, are you blessed, stressed, or burned out? This quiz will unlock a plethora of resources for you to meet you where you are, to address your particular level of stress, as well as give you ideas to decrease the intensity of your level of stress. So take the quiz. Are you blessed, stressed, or burned out? Well, that's all for now. I'm glad you joined me today. I look forward to seeing your comments. Let me know what you think. Let me know what you think about this topic, and let me know what you think about Stress Talk Live with Marcyline. Well, that's all for now. I'm Marcyline Bailey. As always, take good care.